Welcome to Hope at Night, featuring Nathan Greene. Q&A with our live audience and host Anil Kanda. Today's episode, Can Art Heal? And here's your host, Anil Kanda.
Do you remember drawing pictures as a kid? Maybe it was a three-legged cow or a three-legged cat. Or maybe it was the classic sun that always smiled, that had the sunglasses in the corner of your notebook page. I remember doodling dragons and army tanks on the corners of my notebook pages throughout class. Sometimes my best friend Justin and I would go to war with our doodles, with each of us drawing one side of the battle. My soldiers definitely survived better than my grades in math class. You know, art is something that many of us stop doing as we get older, either because life gets busy or we run out of crayons. But tonight we're talking with someone who never stopped drawing and whose artwork has touched countless hearts around the world. His images are found in hospitals, homes, churches, and clinics, painting pictures of hope for many who may have found themselves without it. Please welcome to Hope at Night, Nathan Greene. Nathan, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me here.
Now, when you were younger, were you doodling in your notebook as well?
All the time. I had a reputation in church for doodling while the pastor was preaching. Yes.
What were you drawing pictures of in church?
Oh, I drew some tanks, but not in church. I drew pictures, cartoons. I drew pictures of the people that were speaking. I drew a lot of birds and nature things. That was kind of my interest as a boy. When
did you realize you loved art?
Well, you know, my mother, all credit goes back to our moms, right? My mother painted landscapes for a hobby. And when I was 3, 4, 5 years old, I used to just love watching her do her thing. And that inspired me to want to be an artist. So I just drew and painted from 4 or 5 years old.
Now, I understand that you were originally studying to become a physician, but then something changed. What changed?
Well, I was very interested in science and biology as a boy growing up, and my mother was a nurse, so I used to actually draw pictures, anatomical pictures from her nursing study books, you know. But so I wanted to be a medical illustrator, either a physician or a medical illustrator. But when I was 17, somebody took me to meet a very prominent illustrator and artist in the 20th century, Harry Anderson, who was one of the top illustrators who became a Christian and started doing Christian art. And that had a huge impact on me and my thoughts for the future.
That's wonderful. Now, you know, you're known all over the world for some amazing artwork, right? Mm-hmm. When it comes to art, I've got to ask you, is art an act of worship for you, or is it a witness?
It's something I think of as a potential witness. And I wouldn't call it an act of worship, but I do very much involve, you know, my own spiritual life in how I portray things. When I start a painting, especially if it's a biblical, historical scene, I will pray first. I will read the biblical narrative, and then I will try to imagine myself there. I call it the "you are there" principle, where you close your eyes, you picture yourself there, what it sounded like, what it looked like, maybe what it smelled like, and that helps them visualize it.
In regards to your career in art, what was some of the experiences you had?
Well, I started as a pre-med. Actually, before I went to art school in Chicago, I was a pre-med student, but then I discovered the American Academy of Art. And there I learned all the kind of traditional academic skills. And I started as an illustrator in Chicago, illustrating for many small publishers, World Book Encyclopedia, Children's Press, many of the Christian publishers out in Wheaton, Carroll Stream, Christianity Today, Tyndale House, and eventually Scripture Press, Billy Graham, Focus on the Family, Salvation Army, various things. But then I took a trip out to the East Coast and interviewed with NASA and National Geographic and National Wildlife, and began illustrating for some of those publishers, Ranger Rick magazine, which I grew up with.
Now, I would think in regards to NASA, they're all about photographs, but they're interested in art too as well?
Since the early missions before Apollo, Gemini spacecraft, they had artists there to portray things. Norman Rockwell was one of them who portrayed astronauts preparing for launches. So They've commissioned 300 artists over the years to portray artistically, not just photographically, knowing that it's an emotional experience that sometimes an artist can convey something that a photograph cannot. My last job for NASA was to do a portrayal of Space Station Freedom, which eventually became the International Space Station. And so it was imaginative of what it would look like when it's in space with astronauts doing EVAs and shuttles docking and stuff like that.
Now, what were some of your more, I would put it this way, your earlier art pieces that were really defining for you in regards to faith?
Well, like I said, I started as an illustrator doing lots of books and magazine illustrations for these various publishers, but I wanted to do something more faith-based. But I had to make a living like most artists starting out. You take what comes. But Signs of the Times magazine contacted me to do some artwork. They wanted me to do a cover of Jesus as a carpenter. And that was probably one of the first times that I did a painting of Jesus. And that was very well received. And after that, one commission after another came for painting a portrait of Jesus in various ways, sometimes for publications, sometimes for paintings.
Now, your artwork is found in hospitals, so the impact of your artwork goes far and beyond. Yeah. But there's also stories connected to your artwork. What are some of those stories?
Well, I just want to mention Harry Anderson, the artist I met when I was 17. He had a big influence further on down in my career. I was getting kind of burned out on doing many, many book and magazine illustrations. And I was out running one day, and I call it my mile-long prayer. I was praying that God would give me the opportunity to do something more long-lasting, like large oil paintings, like for a hospital. I mean, I was interested in being a physician. I always loved the idea of potentially reaching people in a time of their life when, they're really concerned and realizing the temporary nature of life. And so I got a call from a company that owned 2 hospitals, and they said, we called Harry Anderson and asked him to do 2 paintings for us. He said, well, I'm retired. Call Nathan. He'll do a good job for you. And those paintings were Christ Guide in the Surgeon's Hands, called Chief of the Medical Staff, and another painting called The Family of God, which is Christ surrounded by people from all over the world in different faiths. And once those 2 paintings were published, my career changed almost overnight to where I was doing large oil paintings, 2 to 3, maybe 4 a year for institutions like hospitals, and instead of many, many deadlines. Yeah.
Now, in regards to that picture of Jesus in the hospital room, that's a well-known painting all over the world. People have seen that.
Florida Hospital in Orlando used to give a card with that image on it to every surgical patient who came through their doors. So many stories came back to me of how it touched people. One of them that I loved was of a woman who was going in for a brain tumor to be removed, and it was a very serious surgery. And they gave her that card, and she held on to it as she was being rolled into the operating room. And the anesthesiologist said somehow she was still clutching it once she was under anesthesia. And when they took her out to the recovery room, she was still holding it. And she just wanted the artist to know it meant so much to her, that the idea that Christ is there with us, as Scripture says, I'm with you always.
When you were painting that picture, what was going through your mind?
This is one painting where there was no struggle, for one thing. It's just, it was just very, an easy thing to do. And that's not always the case. And in fact, one lady wrote my publisher and said, tell Nathan that God painted that painting. He just let Nathan hold the brushes. And it kind of felt that way. But I was thinking of how this might touch and inspire people. It was originally created for surgeons to inspire them outside a surgeon's lounge, but they quickly realized at the hospital it went to that it was the patients that most were influenced by it.
I can just imagine, as you were talking about someone in a hospital room, maybe a waiting room, and they're just waiting to hear some news from the doctor or the nurse, and probably these paintings really speak to their hearts and minds.
Yeah. People often ask me which is my favorite painting, and I usually tell them this one, called Chief of the Medical Staff, because of all the ways it's touched people and how I hear about it. But there was a man and his wife at Walt Disney World in Florida, and he had a heart attack, and they rushed him to Celebration Health. And she was a believer, and he was not. And she had, for years, had prayed for him. But they rushed him to surgery, had quadruple bypass surgery. But somebody had shown him a card of that from the gift shop. And when he came out to recovery room, he asked his wife to go down and get 20 of those cards. And he wrote to 20 of his closest friends and family members, this is where I was, and this is who was with me. And when I hear about that, then I get excited about the fact that what I do is not just to meet a deadline or, to pay the bills. It can touch people spiritually.
I'm sure that fills your heart to get those kinds of letters or postcards.
It very much does, yes.
Now, Nathan, I got to ask you though, have your paintings ended up in some strange or unexpected places?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's some interesting stories, just like Harry Anderson, the artist I mentioned, did a painting of Christ at the UN building, and several times black and white versions that have ended up on the National Enquirer, where people claim it was a photograph taken by a tourist. That's happened to my work too in tabloid magazines, yes. But I also hear some interesting stories. Again, the one of Christ, God, and Surgeon, I had a friend who was a mission pilot, and he was going from Bolivia to Peru, and he found a copy of a copy of a copy of that in the customs office. And so these things come up, and they cross all denominational boundaries, which is very pleasing to me. I like that idea.
Now, you talked about this painting, Chief of the Medical Staff?
Yes.
And you said it was fairly easy to paint, but have there been paintings that have been difficult?
Yes.
Could you think of perhaps the most challenging painting you've ever had to paint?
I think the most challenging painting was one of the healing miracles of Christ, of the paralytic at the Pool of Bethesda. I painted Jesus' face over 11 times before I called it adequate. And I actually spent 5 weeks painting it and scrubbing it out and repainting it. And I think it's because I find painting Jesus himself is the most challenging thing. And if I don't get that right, then the whole painting is not worth its salt. And that particular time, I just wanted to show the love and the compassion and the kindness and the divinity of Jesus. But I'm painting from a human model. And so to make that translation is sometimes a challenge.
I can see why it might have been a struggle for you to get that expression right.
Yes.
When you're doing that.
Yeah.
Now, are you just sitting in front of a blank canvas when you're thinking about these things? Are you doodling in a notebook prior to this? Tell us the secrets, when it comes to this stuff.
I had a family member who once said, it must be nice to just be in the studio doing arts and crafts all day. And well, the truth is that what I do is very well planned out ahead of time. I start with an idea. Sometimes I'll do doodles and sketches. That's where the doodling comes in. And then I pose models. Norman Rockwell used to say, spare the models, spoil the picture. And so I try to find models. It's like casting for a movie. Try to find models that fit the character I'm looking for. And so then I do a preliminary comp that's an elaborate pencil drawing, and then I transfer that to canvas. So by the time I'm painting in color, most of the composition and perspective and lighting, it's all been figured out ahead of time.
I got to ask you then, how long does an average painting take?
These large oil paintings take anywhere from 3 or 4 months on up to beyond a year. There's 2 paintings that I've done that have taken a full year. Yeah.
Was it because you just had to keep going back to it and get the expression right, like you were saying?
Because they were very big and complex.
Okay.
2 of those paintings, the painting called The Blessed Hope, it's a painting of the second coming of Christ. That was very large and complicated. Just the painting itself took a year and probably another 4 months of prep time.
Nathan, when do you know a painting is actually done? I can just imagine just thinking as you're looking at a painting thinking, I don't like that person's face. Maybe I need to change the color here. Maybe the sunrise color could be a little bit different. How do you know when it's finally done?
Well, I usually tell people that when I feel like I can walk into the scene and everything seems complete and the atmosphere and everything's there. But I also tell my agent that I usually like to keep them around for a few weeks, to keep them for observation, I tell them, because I will often see something a few days later or a week later that I want to change and tweak. And he knows that. So,
what are you presently working on?
Currently, I'm doing a large series of 12 of the Healing Miracles of Christ for Loma Linda Hospital. They just recently built an entirely new hospital at Loma Linda, and they wanted this scene to be on the main floor, what they call the grand hallway, because they know that many people who come through their doors may never step foot into a church. And but this is a moment when they realize that life is not forever, that they may be struggling with something with a loved one or themselves. They realize the temporary nature of life. And so this is an opportunity, what I like to call, to have a sermon on the wall that can touch people spiritually and perhaps for eternity. showing the love and kindness and compassion of Christ. It's the character of God. That's what it's all about.
You know, I as you were talking, I was just pondering this, that some people end up at the hospital and never leave.
Yeah, and I'm aware of that. In fact, 3 of the 12 paintings I'm doing for Loma Linda are resurrection scenes. And that's with the knowledge that some people who do bring a loved one or themselves to a hospital may not leave. And this is a reality that we have to all face sooner or later. And so I wanted those scenes of the resurrection of Lazarus, the son of the widow of Nain, and Jairus' daughter. I wanted people to see those paintings and realize, hey, you know, Jesus came and showed us that death is a temporary problem, that that we have the potential for eternal life, and he proved that to us.
And these are just beautiful pictures of hope, as you had said earlier.
Yeah.
Nathan, I know we have much more to talk about. It's exciting. If you've ever seen a painting that stopped you in your tracks, that made you feel something deeper, you know the power of art. When we come back, we're going to find out more about the artwork on the set. We'll also peek behind Nathan Greene's canvas and find out some of the real-life stories connected to the subjects in his paintings. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Hope at Night. We've been talking with master artist Nathan Greene, a man who paints hope and who has made Bible stories come alive through his brush strokes. Nathan, I know you have a set of paintings called the Black Lamb series. Could you tell us a little bit of the inspiration behind those paintings?
Well, I happen to have married a daughter of a sheep farmer from central Michigan. Ralph Jocelyn was his name, and when I first started dating his daughter, he had about 150 sheep. They're all Suffolk sheep, an English breed. But I noticed one day, you know, we often watch them giving birth, and I noticed one day that, of course, the lambs of Suffolk sheep are black when they start out. And I thought, why? We always see Jesus holding a little white lamb, which has its symbolism, but why not a black lamb? Because there's the old saying, the black sheep of the family. And I thought a lot of people would relate to that. So I did a painting called The Lamb of God. It's a picture of Christ holding a black lamb close to his heart. And that's a little baby Suffolk sheep, inspired by my father-in-law. And that was so successful. People really did identify with that I did a whole series. I think there's 5 or 6 of them altogether.
Now, I can see why that painting really resonated with people, because we all sometimes feel like the black sheep of the family,
I think
right?
we can all relate to that, yes.
Right, the outsider, the one who doesn't fit in.
Yeah.
And it's a painting of Jesus holding this lamb very close to him.
Yeah.
What was the message you were trying to communicate with that painting?
I think it's foremost that no matter what we've done in life, that God is willing and able and is offered to forgive. And so that's showing God's character through love and compassion, the willingness to forgive no matter what. Because I think a lot of times we think, oh, I've done bad things, God can't love me, you know, and that's just not true. That's not what the Bible teaches.
That's beautiful. Now, you have another well-known painting called Johnny Made Whole.
Yes.
What's the inspiration and story behind that?
That was actually commissioned by a hospital president whose own son had cerebral palsy. And he wanted a painting that would be an encouragement to parents and children who are going through tough times, perhaps illness or severe illness. And when I realized his son had cerebral palsy, I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to show him walking away from his wheelchair in heaven? I don't need this anymore. And that was the idea behind it.
That's incredible.
Interestingly, many families who have lost children have asked me permission to have an engraving of that image on their children's tombstone. And it's become pretty moving for family members, and to realize, again, that God has promised to heal all these things.
I can see that. I just imagine, someone like a parent coming back to that tombstone and seeing that picture and the reminder of that hope.
Yeah, I love the thought that it will encourage them and remind them.
Now, earlier we brought up one of the most complicated paintings you've ever had to do was the Blessed Hope.
Yes.
Right? Could you tell us a bit about the details and stories and some of the people that are part of that painting?
Yes. Well, the Blessed Hope is a depiction of the second coming, but it's also a depiction of the resurrection, which is also in the Bible. And I thought, I have an opportunity here to encourage some friends of mine who have lost a young child. Our friends David and Carrie were missionaries in Sierra Leone, Africa, and they came back because their little girl, Christy, was ill. It turns out she had neuroblastoma, which is a brain cancer. And we got to know them really well during this time. She lived another year and a half, but she did die at age 4.5 of cancer. And I did a portrait of her 2 years after she passed away, of her holding a little white kitty and Jesus about to pet the kitty, and they have that in their home. But it was years later that I was commissioned to do this painting. And I thought, this is a great opportunity to remind David and Carrie that they will see their little girl again. And so that's a model posing as Christy, being reintroduced to her parents.
That's beautiful. You have so many other people in that painting.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more about those other people too?
They're all real people. We had other friends. There's a couple in there receiving a baby from an angel, and they had experienced a miscarriage in their marriage. My wife and I, the first pregnancy ended in miscarriage. So we know that these things are common, but they're very impactful emotionally for the parents, especially the mother, I think. And so again, encouragement to people who have experienced that. There's also a little girl in there. My only representative of China is a little girl, probably about 10 years old. And I put her all by herself out in the open with her arms outstretched. And it almost, if you look at the painting, it almost looks like Jesus is looking right at her. His arms are outstretched, hers are outstretched. And I wanted children to look at that and think, identify with her, that Jesus would come if it was only for me. And it has had that effect. I've heard stories of young children, young teenagers saying, I want to be there. And they identify with these children.
Now, we have 4 of your paintings of 4 of the 7-day creation set that you did.
Yep.
Now, I see equations, I see numbers. Now, are those real numbers and equations?
They are real, but I can't claim to have brilliance and expertise in that aspect of science, but I have good friends. I have a chemist friend and a physicist friend who advised me on what equations would be meaningful and appropriate. When I started this series, I was trying to think, how can I portray what is in the mind of God, the Creator, when He's about to create our world and all that's in it? And the laws of nature came to mind. And the symbols as we know and understand them, the formulas, the equations, the symbols of the golden mean, nuclear energy, all these different aspects are definable in terms of numbers and equations.
Now, I see on this picture right here that really caught my attention of Jesus, and I see E equals MC squared there.
Yeah.
And I see a number of other equations. Now, what is this picture supposed to represent? Is it creation? Yes.
Yes, this is the first day of creation, where in Genesis it says that the Spirit of God moved upon the waters. So you have the waters, you have the light, which could represent the sun, but it could also represent the presence of God, because in Scripture, He is often described as being brilliant light. And then, to me, the translucent robe of Christ, because I believe it was Jesus, is the foremost part of the creation process. So the figure of Christ and then the robe being translucent represents the Holy Spirit. So this is the Trinity portrayed in the beginning of creation.
And then is that, I see plants and trees.
Yep.
What day is that?
That's day 3.
Day 3, okay.
That's when all plant life was created, and you have the formulas for the chart for photosynthesis and the process of processing nitrogen. There are also images. I collaborated with a Japanese artist who had done some beautiful two-dimensional digital imagery of plant life of various forms, and he allowed me to use some.
That's wonderful. I see Jesus here creating sea life, and then I see the 6th day right here, the creation of mankind.
Yes. Day 5, the one of Jesus creating all marine life and birds, is my favorite of the 7. And I love this idea. This was a designer friend who suggested that I have Christ just standing on the water, which is something in the gospel of Christ standing on the water, coming to the boat with the disciples, but just spinning around and all this life kind of coming out from his hand. But that took 5 months, the same amount of time that the first 4 days of creation took to paint. And then, of course, day 6 is another favorite because I have various animal life, mammals, and but it's also showing the creation of man from the dust of the ground.
Now, are there details that are hidden in your paintings that most people don't know about? You got to share the secrets on TV.
Well, you know, as a young illustrator, usually we had contracts with publishers that promised we would not do that. Sometimes accidentally things have appeared, but there's nothing really hidden here, but there are things that I'm aware of that maybe others aren't. In the painting day 5, I had a teacher come up to me while I was still working on that, and she said, if you could put Dory and Nemo and Dude Crush in there, my children would love that. And so I did. You'll find all 3 of them there. And this painting here, you will notice while Christ is creating man, there's a gorilla and several other types of primates in the trees looking on. That's kind of my anti-evolution statement, that these are were created simultaneously. Because I believe in as God as a creator used economy of design. You know, the fact that there are similarities between primates and man doesn't mean we evolved from them. It means he used similar design structures, and which is all through nature.
Right, and in all these, in animal life, in the animal kingdom, you see, an aspect of God's glory, but in humanity, you see this fullness.
Yes, there's
this
a fullness.
Great expression of who God created us to be.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Now, we had talked earlier about the series of paintings that you are working on for Loma Linda. Mm-hmm. You know, when it comes to the healing miracles of Jesus, are you getting your inspiration directly from just simply in front of a Bible? Like, are you talking to scholars and theologians? Are you watching things on TV and just trying to capture a picture? Like, how is this stuff coalescing in your mind in regards to these particular set of paintings?
Well, I actually took a trip with my agent, my wife, with an archaeologist and his wife to Jerusalem and to Jordan, and we did research. We actually know where 9 of the 12 healing miracles took place. At least we believe where they took place. And I have several friends who are archaeologists and several other theologians, so I consult them heavily because I'm a little obsessive about the research part of these. I want them to be accurate and authentic. And like this painting behind us now is a painting of the blind man where Jesus rubbed the clay and spittle in his eyes and then told him to go wash his eyes in the pool of Siloam. I was hoping the pool of Siloam was actually there visible behind them, but no, this took place right outside the Temple Mount, the south wall of the Temple Mount. And then about a quarter mile or so down some steps is the pool of Siloam. So, but it gave me a chance to render Jerusalem architecturally in an accurate way. So, no, I try to achieve authenticity in everything I do, but I do occasionally use artistic license because it has to be a pleasing composition and something people can relate to. I do avoid watching current, like The Chosen. People kept asking me, have you seen The Chosen? Have you seen The Chosen? And I've been avoiding it because I don't want that to influence how I portray these healing miracles.
You know, in regards to Jesus, we talked earlier about how, you want to get the face of Jesus right. Yeah. Do you use different, pictures of Jesus? Do you paint different pictures of Jesus? Why not just a uniform picture? What's the thinking behind that?
I think that probably most people don't understand that I need a model, and I've had two over the years. The first was half Lebanese, half Hispanic, but he grew older. It changed. I mean, Jesus was 33 at the end of his time here on earth. And the current model is half Cuban and half Spaniard, but now he's in his 50s. So I'm really challenged right now in the Healing Miracle series to make him look younger. I'm combining pictures I took of him 25 years ago with ones I've taken just in the last few years. I'm actually currently looking for a new model. So if I look at any of you kind of too long or strangely,
then we know why.
I might be, you might be a prospect. So.
In regards to painting the face of Jesus, what is something you absolutely have to have that's so important to you when it comes to the face of Jesus?
That's an excellent question. It's one of the reasons why I search, in my search for a new model, I've looked at a lot of professional model agencies, and I'm trying to avoid a look of sultry worldliness, which you usually see when you look at models, currently. So I'm looking for a look of kindness and compassion and friendliness and welcoming look. And also that potential for a look of divinity that is really hard to see. And yet any model I choose is human, and they will have their faults and foibles. But if they at least do not have that hard worldly look, then there's the potential. But then there's certain, the book of Isaiah says that there was nothing about Jesus that would draw man to him. It was more his presentation, his character, the words that he said. But people need to have a somewhat handsome visage. I don't think it should be overdone. But in fact, the current model I used was the first model I used for Adam in the Adam and Eve painting. And I was afraid if I used him, he was a hunk. He's 6'2", he's good looking. And I thought, no, this is over the top. But when I put him in a robe, he had this majestic quality to him. That was what I was looking for.
I know there has been some depictions of Jesus extremely muscular, not just toned, but extremely, it's like he's doing some bodybuilding, and then, his clothes come off and they hanging him on the cross. And I'm like, you can tell they took some license there.
I just recently did a new painting of the crucifixion of Christ, and it was the whole scene. It was commissioned by a client in Europe, in Prague. And I actually used a different model for that. He was a lean guy that my wife found at the doctor's office. My wife has a lot more courage than I do when it comes to coming up to models and asking permission. Chutzpah, I think, is what she has. Because I'm shy, I've avoided potentially great models, and she'll go right up to them. And this guy worked out great, and he was lean. He worked physically, manually, and so he had the look that I was looking for.
What did she say? Did she just look at this man like, I think you would look good as Jesus? What'd she tell him?
I wasn't there, but that's probably what she said. And some people are really interested, and some people are very cautious, but usually when they come and do the modeling experience, they enjoy it.
I imagine. So, you once talked about the earth being just a blip, and that you hope to keep painting in heaven.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What do you think you'll be painting in regards to heaven?
Well, I have an awareness. I go to an art museum. Like I trained in Chicago at the American Academy of Art, and I had a full-time pass for the the Art Museum of Chicago, Art Institute of Chicago. And I would go and study other artists' work. And there is a purpose for art that is different in a sense than what I do. I have an eternal spiritual message I'm trying to convey. But art as a aesthetic beauty and as something that can just raise the caliber of life and enjoyment of life, that's important too. And I think if I didn't feel the need to touch people spiritually, I would very much enjoy just painting for aesthetic pleasure and to share that pleasure. And I think in heaven, the potential for painting just for enjoyment. I mean, I'd love to go out every day and do plein air painting. I would really enjoy that. But that doesn't complete the mission that I feel I have, that I feel God has called me to do, to reach people spiritually.
At one time I walked into a church, I saw a placard that had a Bible verse that says, "Eye has not seen, nor ear has heard the things that the Lord has prepared for those who love him." And it sends this message that apparently anything we've seen on earth, anything we've ever heard, anything that's entered into the human mind doesn't compete with the glory that's in heaven.
Yeah.
Now that's just astounding to think about.
Yeah.
I mean, painting in heaven, but just much less just what the first few moments must be like in a world untouched by violence and evil and suffering.
Yeah. I have done several paintings of heaven. The Lion and the Lamb, where children are gathered around a lion, and some of them are running up, and Christ is there, and he's encouraging a little boy to pet the lion. There's another called Lord God Made Them All, where Jesus has children gathered around and by the seashore, and dolphins are coming up, and he's encouraging them to reach out to touch the dolphins. These are, of course, my imagination, but to imagine what actually painting in heaven would be like, it'll be awesome, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So.
What other, colors could there be out there? What is materials that are available?
Yeah.
It's incredible to think about.
Yeah.
I have one more important question for you, which I think it really connects to all of this. What do you hope people feel when they see your paintings?
That's a great question. I hope people will look at my paintings, like I said earlier, as a sermon, that this is meant to say something about God and what he's like and his character and how we then relate to that, I think a misunderstanding of God's character has been the root of so many problems throughout history, wars over religious ideas. It's all because people misunderstand God and his character of love and kindness and forgiveness. And so that's what I most hope for. And I hope people see something about God that wins them to him.
That's beautiful. And what I'm hearing from you is this idea, it's not just physical paintings of Jesus, but you want the world to see the true picture of who he really is.
Yes.
Especially in a world that has so many other pictures of God.
There's a lot of, even artwork sometimes says a message about God's character that I believe is false and needs to be avoided. But in a world that's full of strife and war and misunderstanding of God, we need to know what God is really like. And I think that's what the Bible is all about. I mean, it's 66 books that tell a story about God's character and what he's really like. And there's some things in there that are difficult, but the ultimate message, I think, of the Bible is that in the end, he wants to forgive us. He loves us. He wants to take as many of us, save us, and have eternity for each one of us.
Nathan, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Nathan Greene's paintings may be made of oil and canvas, but they speak in a language of hope. A hope that reaches into hospital rooms, living rooms, and even the quiet spaces where we wonder if God still sees us. We need to go to our break, but before we do, I just want to invite you to visit our website at hopetv.org/hopeatnight, where you can view previous episodes and also download this season's free gift. When we come back, we'll open up the floor for questions for Nathan. Stay with us. Welcome back to Hope at Night. We've been having a great conversation with renowned artist Nathan Greene. I could listen to him all day, but I know some of you in our audience have questions of your own. Who'd like to ask Nathan a question? Right over there.
I'm deeply inspired by a painter's ability to imagine an image in their heads and then be able to convey that in a way for the world to see. Are there any paintings that you have ideas for but haven't yet been able to convey in a satisfying way?
Yes, I think Further Scenes of Heaven are probably the biggest challenge. And I'm not even sure if I should go too far there, because it's trying to capture something that no one has seen yet and can only imagine. And our imaginations do have limits, So that would be, as far as things I haven't done yet, to me, the greatest challenge I've ever done, and I agree with Harry Anderson on this. Harry Anderson and I used to meet together at his home in Connecticut, and I asked him once, what was the most challenging thing you ever painted? And he immediately said, depicting the second coming of Christ. Because how can any human being, no matter how talented an artist you may be, how can you portray such a glorious event? And so that was one that I tackled, and with humility through the whole process, knowing that this is only a hint of what it will actually be.
In regards to these paintings, I know sometimes people reach out to you, and you're commissioned to paint a picture. Yeah. Do you have guidelines? Do people? Are there things that you're just like, I'm not going to paint that? When it comes to your interactions with those that ask you to do that.
Yeah, most of those kind of situations occurred very early in my career. And if I could tell a quick story about that, when I was first taking my portfolio around Chicago, I went to I wanted to be a freelance, but I thought, well, maybe I'll work for a studio first. Interviewed at a studio, and as I walked in the doors, I could tell that a lot of the subject matter they deal with, whiskey and Playboy magazine and all this stuff was there, but they were product illustrations too. So I met with a guy, and he really liked my work, and I had a painting of a polar bear in there, and he said, wait, I think I have a job for you. He ran off to meet with a major ad agency, came back 30 minutes later and said, you got the job. If you want it, it's $5,000. And I'm like, oh, because I was just a poor student, and sure. But he said, I asked what it was, and he said, it's a billboard ad for Cool Cigarettes for Leo Burnett. And I said, oh, I'm really sorry, man. I can't take that. And he was so kind and respectful. He even offered me a job. So people will accept no for things like that. But you do have to make a stand for what you believe in and what you don't believe in. My grandfather passed away from lung cancer from smoking when I was 13. And so just for my own faith and for what I recognize in society, it's not something I want to support.
Right.
Yeah.
It communicates a lot about you, and it tells me you're someone who is principled. And in regards to your paintings, it's part of you is in that painting, and you want to represent yourself and God well. Yeah.
You have to live with yourself at the end of the day.
Right.
Yeah, and the choices you make.
Right. Any other questions? Right over there.
You mentioned that in the past you've painted other subjects, but now do you only do religious pieces?
Primarily, yes. But occasionally, it's rare, but occasionally, like we have a friend of my agent who invited us to come out to his ranch. And his boss has a lot of ranch land out west. And we went to watch a roundup and branding and roping and tying and all that. And I came back and I did 5 watercolors of that. It was kind of a rare example, and I just thoroughly loved it. They invited me to come back to cow camp the next spring and ride up the hills, but my experiences with horses, I love to look at them, but they tend to step on my feet a lot. They know I'm an amateur, and but that would have been fun too. But yeah, I've got a lot of deadlines still, so I don't get to do that very often.
Now, you also have a well-known painting of Abraham Lincoln.
Yes.
What's that about?
Well, one of the clients that's commissioned other works, my agent was traveling with him and a few other guys in the Mediterranean, and my agent said, hey, Brad wants to talk to you, and he wants to commission a work. And so this was wonderful, because Brad, unlike most other clients, he didn't say, I want you to do this or that subject. He said, what would you like to paint? And so I told him, well, years now I've been listening to books on audio and now Audible while I work, because it uses a different part of the brain or something, because I can go through a book every 3 days on Audible. And I said my favorite topics are American history and biographies, and said I'd like to do something on Abraham Lincoln. And he said, great, send me some sketches and we'll see how it goes. So I've done 3 paintings for him on Abraham Lincoln, one of him visiting Antietam 10 days after the battle. And the one that we have on display behind us now is of Lincoln being taken to Richmond just 5 days before the end of the war, and where he was greeted by a group of newly freed slaves. And in minutes, there were hundreds and then thousands of them thanking him for their freedom. He was assassinated just 10 days after this event, and most Americans aren't even aware that this ever happened. So I love that. I love if it weren't for more of the spiritual purpose in my mission as an illustrator, I would probably do more American history because I enjoy recreating things that a camera never took a picture of.
Right. And even in those moments that are not exactly, pictures of Jesus or biblical experiences, there's still something deeply spiritual.
Well, Abraham Lincoln was one of those men who demonstrated by his life the decency, honesty, integrity that I believe is part of God's character. And when you see people that reflect that, I think they should be held up as examples because they seem to be so few.
Right. Nathan, what's the biggest painting you've ever painted?
Well, I did a mural for the Horn Archaeology Museum at Andrews University that was 89 feet long, but it was only about 20 inches high. But it was the history of the Holy Land from the earliest time, from Abraham's time on up to through the Islamic period. But I did a mural once for the Lifestyle Son of America that's now down in Texas. And it was about 10.5 by 8.5 feet, I think. So, yeah. But these healing miracles are by far the most time-consuming and elaborate that I'm doing.
Yeah, especially you want to get it right.
Yes. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I would love to know if you've ever felt the presence of God while you were painting.
Yes, definitely yes. Sometimes I feel he's not there, and that can be a struggle. I think the time that I painted Jesus' face over 11 times, I think that, part of it was a spiritual thing within me, that, how you can kind of go through life and feel like detached from God, maybe by your own choices or what you're focusing on in life. There's actually a very good friend of mine, Mark Finley, who's an evangelist and pastor, knew I was going through that struggle, and he called me on the phone after my 9th attempt and said, let's talk about it, and he encouraged me to kind of eliminate some of the more secular things that I had going on, the stories I was listening to, and to pray earnestly before I start the process each day. And then we prayed together. And it took me a couple more attempts, but I did get it after that. But the painting of Christ guiding the surgeon's hand, I felt God's presence through that whole process. A painting of Christ as the carpenter, it took 2 days to paint that. It was a different technique than traditional oil painting, but I definitely felt God's presence there. Why I don't always feel that, I don't know, but definitely there have been times. The day after I met Harry Anderson, I was back at my high school academy talking to a friend, and I suddenly felt the presence of God's Spirit. It was almost like he was surrounding me. And I told my friend, I was 17 years old. And I said, I don't know what it is, but I think God has a plan for me, and it's related to meeting Harry Anderson. And boy, did that ever work out that way.
That's life, right?
Yes.
I mean, there are moments that we feel very close to God, and there are moments that we just don't.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that he's left us or abandoned us.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be based on if we ate cheese pizza last night. We just sometimes feel up and down, right?
How much sleep you've had.
Right.
Or, yeah.
Exactly. Any other questions?
Nathan, have you ever dabbled in any sort of digital art forms or used any design software to create images?
Yes. Yes and no, or I should say no and yes, because for many years, I'm still a traditional painter. But for many years, I did the compositions before I do the painting just by drawing freehand and sketching and erasing. But when it came to doing the painting of the Second Coming, which was about 15 years ago, this was way too complex to try to do that way. So I got Photoshop software. I bought a big monitor for my computer, and I hired some friends to teach me how to use it. And I know how to use it, but I'm dangerous if you ask me to go too far. But I did the whole comp in Photoshop. But that's as far as I take the technology. When I'm done with that, I go back to traditional drawing and then transfer it to traditional painting. I do have friends who are illustrators that do almost all their work digitally. And that's the way of things now. I feel sorry for young artists who want to do it the old-fashioned way, because especially in the illustration world, it's almost all done digitally.
AI can create images of everything, not just images, videos now.
Yeah.
But, it's fascinating. I was listening to one scholar and researcher sharing that even though AI is taking over, in regards to these images and these videos that are out online, the individual who is still unique in their artwork, in their talent, in their gift will actually become more valuable because there's something that cannot be, at the end of the day, duplicated or replicated by AI.
Yeah. And that's why I don't freak out about AI, because I think there always will be a place for the good old-fashioned traditional approach, because people do know and appreciate that. And so I think it's be sort of like vinyl records, they were just, everybody was getting rid of them, and all of a sudden, hey, wait a minute, we like this. We like to hear the static, and we like to hear the little flaws. It's real.
The source matters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I'm curious, since scripture tells us that we're created in God's image, have you ever considered painting other nationalities of what Jesus could look like? Perhaps a darker skin tone? If so, why or why not?
Yeah, that's a good question. I deliberately chose to try to paint Jesus as I understood a Jewish man 2,000 years ago might have looked like. The challenge I have is living in Michigan. It's hard to find somebody with a Middle Eastern or Semitic complexion, because I asked an archaeologist, Siegfried Horn, years ago what Christ might have looked like, and he felt like a modern day Arab of certain, like Lebanese maybe, or, so olive complexion. What I had available was Hispanic mainly, and that's why I used, the first guy was Lebanese and Hispanic, the current guy is Cuban and Spaniard, but I still think he should be a little darker complected, but there's many different qualities that I'm looking for as well. So having taken a trip to Israel and Jordan, I realized when I was there's European Jews, there's Arab Jews, and the Arab Jews had more of that look I'm looking for. So when I came back home, I did research for model agencies in Oman and Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, hoping to find a model, and because I could afford, I think now, to bring one over if I had to. And after about three or four days of searching, I started getting messages on my computer saying, "Here's more gorgeous men for you to look at." And so I ceased my search. So I'm currently praying that God will help me find the right model that has that Middle Eastern look. Yes.
It's interesting though, because some people are really offended by particular images of Jesus.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking so much about just an image of Jesus, but we've typically seen in maybe the movies or paintings of that blonde, I don't call him blonde, maybe a dirty blonde, blue-eyed Jesus, right?
Sure.
And it was very much a picture of Jesus that represented Caucasians.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you try to find a picture of Jesus that most represents probably what he looked like.
Probably, but we don't really know.
We don't know for sure, right?
I am sympathetic with the idea that he should be darker still in complexion, but I have to find the right model.
Right,
I think people don't realize that I don't just invent these things from my imagination. I need to have a good model, because you need to have lighting and see how the shadows fall and all these things, and then all the aspects of character we talked about earlier. So boy, if I could find the right combination with that look of kindness and compassion, I would like that.
Nathan, you need to take a trip to India. All right. Any other questions? Right over there.
I wondered if you have ever had a personal struggle with your own faith that perhaps kept you from completing a deadline?
Yeah, I don't know if I have, yes, but I don't know how much it kept me from completing a deadline. I used to say that printing presses wait for no man. And I think everybody goes through cycles of warmth and coolness in their relationship. We all probably struggle with doubts at times. Usually for me, it's been at times when I've been under a lot of pressure and stress, sometimes from deadlines. Sometimes my greatest challenge at meeting deadlines was when we had young children. We have 3 children, and you're trying to balance all of this. Because I'm an artist, almost every artist I know struggles with the same thing. We tend to work best late in the day and at night. And it's not real conducive to family life, So, but when you've got 3 young children you're raising, and your wife wants you home and spending time together, that can be a real challenge. And sometimes there can be no time for spiritual growth or, taking care of yourself in that regard. So I think during those years, there were some challenging times. I did have some challenge meeting deadlines when my second child, our daughter, was not sleeping well at night, and I was tired all the time. Yeah, and sometimes, spiritual things kind of take a back seat, and it's probably when you need it the most,
right,
is when we tend to neglect it. And so, it's an excellent question and gets to the nitty-gritty of things, doesn't it? Life is challenging, and I think even for pastors and evangelists who do this all the time, they still face the same life's pressures and distractions and everything, and it's a challenge. I think that's why that's why I believe in a day of worship every 7 days, because God wants us to take a break from it. Even if in our mind we're still active and wanting to keep doing what we want to do. I struggle with that, but I know that God wants us to step aside and rest for a while and just put it aside, and we'll be better off when we start the new week.
Right. That pause really helps us to reset and to see things clearer.
Yeah.
We got time for one more question. Right over there.
When you were actually painting a subject, have you ever been brought to tears?
Not while I was painting, but while I was processing how I would paint something, while I was reading the scriptural account, I have been touched emotionally to that extent. But the greater number of times that I've had that reaction is when I see people's reaction to a painting, or when we've just been talking about it and I see them looking at it, and especially if they start to tear up. I do too, because I'm a sensitive sort of guy. You'll find that most artists are, and we can be touched emotionally pretty strongly, especially if we see someone moved by something we've done or created. So yeah, usually the tearing up is when I see somebody else tearing up by a painting. When I did the painting of the resurrection of Jairus' daughter, people have often come to my studio to see a copy of it. While I had the original there, several people came, and I know one of these families, I believe they had lost a child, and they cried when they looked at it. And man, I can't help but tear up when I see that, knowing that it can touch somebody that deeply.
That's inspiring and hopeful.
Yeah.
And I just really appreciate how the paintings that you produce really communicate not just beauty and aesthetic value, but there is a deep message of hope that is so special and enduring and life-changing when we embrace it.
Yeah. And I'm glad you used that word hope, because I think I didn't mention that word when I'm talking about people coming into hospitals and realizing the temporary nature of life. But this artwork is intended to give that hope, that there's something more than this life. There's something more than the evil we see all around us, that God represents love and the future, and eternal future. There's hope.
That's right. That's beautiful. Whether you're an artist, a writer, a teacher, or just someone living your life, remember this. Just as he did with Nathan, God is still painting pictures of hope, and he will gladly let you hold the brush. So what picture of hope will you let God paint through you? In a world often fixated on images of despair, maybe your life, your words, your work, your witness is the masterpiece someone has been waiting to see. A masterpiece that still whispers hope even at night. Don't forget to find us on social media and to visit us at hopetv.org/hopeatnight for your gift.